Hey, shipmate!
I am your Commodore, commanding officer of all rebel captains commissioned in the Freedom Fleet. Last week we left off with the Hornet had been taken as a prize by Thomas Cadigan of the HM sloop of war Porcupine, where she was taken into Port Royal, Jamaica, but rebel Captain James Nicholson managed to escape becoming a POW. We continue with Episode 2, Drama in the Bottom of the Bay. In late April of 77, Captain Nicholson returned to his original command, the frigate Virginia. This ship mounting 28 guns as opposed to the 10 of the Hornet. Her construction was now completed and she was ready for sea, though some challenges still awaited the captain on board. The British blockade of Baltimore Bay was standing in his way. He wouldn't take any prizes on the high seas without getting past them. A frigate, being a larger ship, had a deeper draft through the water. The locals would use back channels and alternate route to evade the blockade, but the frigate would be too large for any of those options, would have to sail straight through the teeth of the blockade. With the blockade and her size, they kept her in port. These combined issues presented a third problem. The Virginia, being a fully rigged ship, meaning she has 3 masts, a forward mast in the forward section, a main mast, the midships, and the mizzen mast to the aft, each mast having a mainsail, a topsail, and a topgallant sail, would require more men than his last command for her to set sail. So if she wasn't sailing, there was little work to be had for the crew. And word passes fast in the sailing community, and it was well known she'd been sitting in port for a while, and she was likely to stay there longer still. Given these challenges, it's pretty hard to recruit men to work for a ship that won't sail. If she won't sail, then she can't take prizes. If she can't take prizes, the crew doesn't get their share of fun from the sale of those prizes. No shares means no beers. And a real sailor always has tavern money. So a sailor without beer ain't working here. On top of the difficulty in getting new recruits for the Virginia, Captain Nicholson had an even greater difficulty keeping the crew members he already had. A plethora of privateer ships were actively sailing from different ports not too far away. Those privateer ships drew from the same labor pool that was available to the Virginia. Privateers tempted sailors away with the lure of big and easy money by capturing slow British merchantmen as opposed to battling out with the world's strongest navy. The privateer ships, they had private funding, so they were fast, heavily armed. So their chance of success was pretty good, capturing slow, unarmed merchantmen. The privateers put a little sprinkle on top, and they were not as strict in their rules of service as opposed to what life was like in the Navy. So you're less likely to be strapped to the mast and last with a whip for a minor infraction. Given these challenges, Captain Nicholson had some unique ideas in how to overcome his lack of manpower. Being fed up with his lower than anticipated numbers, he decided he was done asking, and he started telling. He resorted to an old trick, often used by the British Navy, and impressed local sailors to work the ship. He would have crew enough to set sail on the Virginia, with or without their consent. Though this forceful approach was effective in manning the ship so she would be ready for sea service, it didn't sit so well with the governor of Maryland or Continental Congress. In the Continental Congress session, dated 29 April 77, the letter from Governor Johnson of the 26th of last month on this matter, which contained copies of the governor's letter to Captain James Nicholson and Captain Nicholson's answer, whereupon it is resolved that Congress will never countenance or support any Continental officer in violating the laws of any state or treating its magistrates with contempt. Furthermore, that Captain James Nicholson be suspended immediately from all command in the service of the United States until such time that he shall have made satisfaction as shall be accepted by the executive powers of the state of Maryland for the disrespectful and contemptuous letter written by him to the governor of that state. Furthermore, be it resolved that Captain James Nicholson be served a copy of said resolution, and in the case that he shall not, within 5 days after receiving said resolution, make the satisfaction required, that he be dismissed from his command and from the service of the United States permanently. It is hereby ordered that the foregoing resolutions be immediately transmitted by the Marine Committee, and that they give the necessary orders for immediately dismissing the men impressed by the captain. P.S. The frigate at this place have impressed some seamen, but we have learned that not any complaints have been made on that head. Therefore, state has winked at this measure. This postscript message suggests that the impressed men were being well treated, so it was not as urgent of a matter as it could have been. Worst case, Captain Nicholson could have used the lash to whip men as punishment for any escape attempts, and he also had the authority to hang a man for any attempted mutiny in order to demand the loyalty of his crew. Captain Nicholson received word of his suspension from command and sent a letter in reply. His letter, dated May 5th, 77, Sir, I was yesterday served with the resolve of Congress in consequence of a complaint by Your Excellency with regard to my impressing men on board the frigate, and the letter I wrote Your Excellency on that occasion, by which I find the Congress disapproved of my conduct and ordered me to make such satisfaction as shall be approved by the executive power of the state of Maryland. It has never been my desire, sir, or inclination to violate the laws of my country or treat any of its magistrates with contempt, and am sorry to find the letter I wrote you is viewed by Your Excellency, by Congress, and many of my friends to carry much more contempt and disrespect than I ever intended to. Though I willingly confess that when I came earlier to review the copy of the letter, I disapproved of it myself, and willingly recalled several sentences of it, and was very sorry I sent it. When I received your letter, I immediately apprehended that some person who wished not my welfare had been endeavoring by misrepresentation to prejudice me in your opinion, and it gave me sensible pain to find that they had so far succeeded as to induce Your Excellency to charge me with crimes which my conscience told me I was not guilty. I have never viewed it derogatory to the character of any gentleman to make concessions for any rudeness he may have been guilty to any private gentleman, much less the executive powers of a state, and therefore will make Your Excellency such acknowledgments. For such expressions which my letter may have contained, as is consistent with my honor as a gentleman and an officer, and I would therefore beg to know what satisfaction will be demanded or esteemed sufficient. I freely own it is not my desire at this time to be dismissed the service, and I hope you will believe me when I add that my private interest has not the least weight in producing that desire, and that amongst the other motives, the chief is a desire to profit my country by service, which I fondly think will be more effectually done by my continuing in the ship than the appointment of a stranger, as I am afraid my being dismissed at this time and manner would produce the resignation of most of the officers on board, and consequently delay her sailing even longer. I am, sir, James Nicholson. Captain Nicholson's ill-considered actions of forcibly impressing Maryland citizens to work for him as sailors on the frigate Virginia, which typically means hiring them to work for you at gunpoint, and his cavalier attitude in his letters to Governor Johnson had put him in some serious hot water. The Virginia would remain in port for the rest of '77, working to get her volunteer crew on board while Captain Nicholson cleared his legal battles. So come January '78, Isaac Hopkins, Commander-in-Chief of the American Naval Fleet, was dismissed from the service. So Captain Nicholson, he was ranking high on the list of captains from early on in the war. And with Isaac being dismissed, Captain Nicholson was promoted and became the most senior officer in the Navy and held that rank for the remainder of the war. This distinction, being the highest ranking officer in the Continental Fleet, helped with smoothing out the difficulties of the Governor of Maryland and Congress. He avoided being kicked out of the Navy, and on 30 March '78, Captain Nicholson regained command of the frigate Virginia. That's it for today. The War for Liberty needs you to do your duty. Hit the like button. Enlist with the Freedom Fleet by following and subscribing. Tune in next time to learn the fate of Captain James Nicholson in Episode 3, Sail Fast, Fight Hard, God Save the New Nation.